Philip Sherrard was a remarkable man, and although I did not have the pleasure of meeting him during his lifetime, I have been much inspired by his writings, especially all that he has had to say on the subject of the sacred in life and art. I was therefore delighted to hear that the Temenos Academy, of which I have the great pleasure of being patron, was establishing a Sherrard lecture with the generous support of Eileen Guggenheim, who is one of the trustees of my Prince's Foundation in Shoreditch. I was especially pleased to find that the first of these lectures was to be given by Bishop Kallistow Ware, who not only knew Philip Sherrard well, and indeed worked with him, but who also speaks with such authority on the great traditions of Christian orthodoxy. I attended the lecture and was, of course, utterly fascinated by all that the bishop had to say. The interview that follows is based upon this lecture and is a record of Bishop Kallistow Ware's thoughts on those parts of Philip Sherrard's life with which he was most concerned.
Bishop, I only know Philip Sherrard through his books and his writing, but you knew him and you worked with him. How did you first come to meet?
We first met in the year 1957 here in Oxford. I was at that time a student of theology. He was living in Oxford and he was doing research. He was a person of great charm. I always looked forward to meeting him. He was easy to talk to. I recall the laughter in his eyes. When you read his books, he can sometimes seem polemical, even aggressive. But all of this was because he felt a true zeal, a zeal for the truth.
Now, although he became an academic, you've described him as too much of a free spirit to be at home in academia. What did you mean by that?
If he had wanted, he could have had a conventional career teaching in a university. And he was fully capable of producing scholarly books with plenty of footnotes and a long bibliography. But he never wanted to limit himself to a narrow field of research. He was interested in ideas. He had a very adventurous, wide-ranging mind. It was the essence of what he had to say that interested him, not just the scholarly trappings.
Now we know that Greece was very important in Sherrard's life. And I think he came to Greece for the first time as an officer in the army in the Second World War. What was it, do you think, that Philip Sherrard found in Greece that made him make his home there?
He discovered in Greece a place of tradition where there was a sense of the sacred, a way of life where people lived according to inherited patterns in close contact with the world of nature. He found this traditional attitude in several places. He found it in Greek poetry, and his first book was about modern Greek poets. But he also found it in the life of the Greek Orthodox Church. So he discovered the land of Greece, Greek poetry, and Greek orthodoxy at the same time.
Yes. Philip built himself a home at Katunia, which I think you visited. Tell me something about Katunia.
He fell in love with it at once. He felt at home, that this was where he belonged. Mm-hmm. He valued its seclusion. He would never have a telephone there, and even he didn't have electricity either. But he made it a place where his friends came, a place hospitality and meeting.
And later, with his wife Denise, he built a chapel.
Yes, in his last years, he and Denise, with the help of local craftsmen, built a chapel according to traditional architectural patterns, out of organic materials, beautiful stone and wood.
And after his death, you consecrated the...
3 years after his death, I had the great joy of going out to perform the consecration service. Now there are plans to decorate the chapel with frescoes.
Mount Athos is an important place for all Orthodox, and it was important for Philip Sherrard too. Tell me something about the Holy Mountain.
Philip valued the Holy Mountain first as a place of great natural beauty, an earthly paradise. He loved walking on the old paths which have in our time become often disused and overgrown.
But are now being
restored. Yes, indeed. The restoration is being done each year by the Friends of Mount Athos with the encouragement of the Prince of Wales. This is something that will be rejoicing Philip's heart. But while Mount Athos was for him in this way a place of beauty, a holy place, it was also a place of holy persons. He valued it because of the monastic presence there. So he loved staying in the different monasteries and perhaps still more visiting the more remote hermitages.
One of the particular people on Mount Athos that most inspired and influenced Philip Sherrard was Father Nikon, who I understand was a Russian and a hesychast. Can you tell me something about Father Nikon?
He was a hermit living at the southern tip of the mountain at the settlement known as Carulia. He lived in a little hermitage about 700 feet above sea level at the top of a precipice. He used to say, "Here every stone breathes prayers."
What particular influence did Father Nikon have on Sherrard?
Father Nikon would have spoken to Philip about inner prayer, the short invocation known as the Jesus Prayer. The words, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me," frequently repeated. From Father Nikon, Philip would also have become familiar with the collection of spiritual texts known as the Philokalia. The Philokalia is certainly a difficult book, and it was written for a world very different from our own. It was first published in 1782. It contains Greek spiritual and mystical texts from the 4th to the 15th century. Now, Philip and I, in cooperation with a common friend of ours, Gerald Palmer, from 1970 onwards worked intensively on the translation of the Philokalia into English.
So if someone were to pick up a volume of the Philokalia and open it up, what would they find?
The Philokalia would be concerned with the inner life, inner prayer, the transcendence of God, but also his immediate presence among us. That God is unknowable, and yet he's closer to us than our own heart.
In the foreword of Philip Sherrard's last book, Christianity, Lineaments of a Sacred Tradition, you said that the opening chapter, the meaning and necessity of sacred tradition, summed up Philip's vision of the truth. What did you mean by that?
Let's think about the two words, tradition and sacred. Philip attached great value to tradition, seeing it not as something dead and archaeological, but as a living reality. He says that tradition is the preservation and handing on of a method of contemplation, not just texts written in books, but a way of looking at the wholeness of reality, at God, at ourselves and one another. He believed very strongly that we attain truth through following a recognized tradition. We need to receive the truth, not simply to make it up as we go along.
In his case, orthodoxy.
In his case, orthodoxy, but he recognizes other traditions as also truly transmitting truth. What did he mean by the sacred? He meant anything in which the divine was present. He believed that if a thing is sacred, it points beyond itself to the divine realm. It contains within itself dimensions of eternity. And in fact, Philip believed that everything was sacred. If we think things are secular, that is because of the failure of our own vision, not because the thing is in itself secular. He thought of God as being both transcendent and immanent. God is above and beyond everything, the creator, the other, but at the same time, God is everywhere present, at the heart of everything, the core of its core.
And in this he saw a special role for man.
He did indeed. He believed that yes, all things are sacred because the divine is present in everything, but he considered this was a fallen world. It has been distorted by human sin. The true beauty and wonder of the world has not been abolished, but it's certainly been obscured. And he believed it was our task as human persons to uncover the sacred dimension, to reveal the divine presence, to offer the world back in thanksgiving to God.
In 1990, Philip Sherrard wrote what I think was a very accessible book, The Sacred in Life and Art. In this book, as you know, he talks about the nature of the sacred and particularly about the sacred in art. Can you tell me something about these themes?
His understanding of art and poetry is founded, first of all, on this vision of the presence of God in all things. He saw the artist or poet as a bridge builder, building a bridge between this world, the material world of the senses, and the world of eternal truth, which we humans can apprehend through our creative imagination. I suppose some people might be afraid of the word sacred because it sounds to them too churchy, and because they have a negative picture of the Christian church as an organized institution. But if we understand sacred as meaning that which bears witness to the divine, surely we can't avoid using the word.
We're sitting here in the Orthodox Church in Oxford, and of course we're surrounded by icons. And Those, I suppose, are the mark of what you expect to find when you go into an Orthodox church. So iconography must have been something which he took a particular interest in.
He has some very valuable things to say about the icon. The icon, said Philip, is not just a picture to be hung up on a wall and regarded as we might regard any work of art. The icon, he said, exists in a context. Taken out of this context, it loses its meaning, and the context of the icon is prayer and worship. The icon, we could say, is a door, a way of entry, a means of communication. Through the icon, we are helped to enter into communion directly with the invisible world. It is not that the icon is created from the inner fantasy of the painter, but rather the painter contemplates the truths that the icon expresses. And so it is the objective truths which, as it were, impress themselves upon the panel and then take the form of the icon. But we could also say that there is an iconic quality about all true art. Even if Philip says an icon is not just a work of art like any other, yet he would say that all art does communicate the sacred, and that therefore all true artists in some way or another must reflect the world of eternal reality. Perhaps they are not believers, but unless they have some sense of the sacredness and the mystery of the world, they won't produce true art.
When I read the work of Philip Sherrard, I feel that despite his reference to tradition, he really has something to say which is most relevant to us in the 21st century.
Towards the end of his life, he became increasingly concerned with the current ecological crisis. And he became increasingly critical of what he saw as the misuse of science. He was not against science as such, but he considered that in the West, since the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, science had become distorted and narrowed. He thought the roots of this went back even to the Middle Ages, to the scholasticism of the 12th century. He thought that the reason for the present environmental crisis is spiritual. The real problem is not technology or lack of economic resources. The real problem is that we, human beings, have come to look at the world in a gravely distorted way. If you like, the crisis is not in the environment, it is in the human heart.
A crisis of values.
Indeed, we have lost the sense of the sacred. We have failed to see that the world is a sacrament, and because of this, we are polluting and misusing the world. So what is needed is an act, if you like, of cosmic repentance, in the literal sense of the Greek word metanoia, a change of mind. We must alter our image of ourselves as human beings, and this will lead us to alter our image of our place in the world, and that is where the solution lies. So he saw the environmental crisis, so-called, as basically a loss of the sense of the sacred.
In the end, if you had to choose just one of Philip Sherrard's books, which would it be?
I would choose the lecture which he gave in 1994, 1 year before his death, to the Temenos Academy. The title of that lecture was taken from the poet William Blake. Everything that lives is holy. That I see as Philip's last will and testament. And that statement of Blake about the holiness of all persons and all things, I consider to be his central intuition and his legacy to us for the future.
Thank you, Bishop.
Good.